Some of you might think that us humans are frail creatures. Well, you better think again. Many have faced seemingly impossible odds and survived, sometimes resorting to unspeakable things for the sake of survival. Without further ado though, here are 10 times people actually survived impossible situations. Number 10. Sławomir Rauliks. Sławomir Rauliks was a young Polish cavalry officer that was called up to defend his country against the advancing Nazi and Soviet invasions at the beginning of the Second World War. He ended up being captured by Soviet forces and was sent to Moscow in 1939. From there, he was then convicted on false charges of espionage and was sentenced to 25 years hard labor. The trip to Siberia was brutal. He had to ride in the back of an open cattle truck in sub-zero temperatures and then march hundreds of miles in chains. But somehow he managed to survive. Then in April of 1941, in the middle of a particularly strong blizzard, Rauliks and 6 other POWs escaped, surprisingly with the help of the warden's own wife. They walked 4,000 miles to the south, crossing the Gobi Desert and the Himalayas, as well as enduring harsh cold, blazing heat, thirst, and starvation. 3 of the 7 escapees died along the way, and by the time they had reached India, where they were rescued by a Gurkha patrol, Rauliks weighed only 70 pounds. Though he never fully recovered from his ordeal, Rauliks lived to the age of 88, and his story eventually became both a book and a movie titled The Long Walk and The Way Back, respectively. Number 9. Poon Lim. In November of 1942, the British merchant ship Ben Lomond left Cape Town, South Africa. It was on a voyage across the Atlantic to pick up cargo at the then Dutch Guyana, and now the nation of Suriname. But when the ship was 750 miles off the South American coast, it was torpedoed by a German U-boat and sank. The lone survivor was a 24-year-old Chinese seaman named Poon Lim who managed to jump overboard. Struggling to the surface, Lim found one of the ship's rafts. Even more remarkably though, he located a tank of water and some cans of food in the floating wreckage. He was able to improvise a fishing tackle to catch more food, and he somehow managed to survive for 133 days adrift. That was until he was rescued by Brazilian fishermen a mere 10 miles off the coast. A local newspaper reported that Poon was badly sunburned and had lost 30 pounds, but otherwise was in good health, except for an upset stomach that doctors believed was the result of eating raw fish. Number 8. Helen Klaben. 21-year-old Helen Klaben wanted to travel from Fairbanks to Seattle, but decided to save a few pennies by flying with an amateur pilot, 42-year-old Ralph Flores. It turned out to be the wrong time for penny pinching, however, when Flores' plane crashed on February 4th, 1963, in a snowstorm in an extremely remote part of the Canadian wilderness. The passenger and pilot suffered broken bones and other injuries, but they were both alive. As luck would have it, they had no survival equipment except for a box of matches, and their food supply consisted of exactly 4 cans of sardines, 2 cans of tuna, 2 cans of fruit cocktail, and a bottle of vitamin pills. To survive the deadly nighttime temperatures that dropped as low as 42 degrees below zero, they fashioned a blanket from the plane's carpet and stuffed clothes and spruce boughs into the cracks in the plane's cabin to insulate it, and they used gasoline from the wrecked plane's fuel tank to build a fire. Their food only lasted about a week, forcing them to survive on melted snow. Fortunately, both passenger and pilot were overweight. Okay, yeah, I know that sounds mean, but that actually is an advantage in this situation. They survived off their body fat for another 42 days until an aircraft finally spotted them. Number 7. Anna Bagenholm. In May of 2000, 29-year-old orthopedic surgeon in training Dr. Anna Bagenholm was skiing on a familiar trail outside Narvik, Norway, when she lost her balance on a gully and fell headfirst into an icy river. Her head and body became stuck under thick ice. It would have meant certain doom for her, but she somehow managed to find an air pocket so that she could keep breathing. After 40 minutes of struggling and failing to free herself, the exhausted skier was on the verge of hypothermia. It took 40 minutes for Bagenholm's friends to free her from the ice and drag her out of the cold water. By then, her body temperature had dropped to just 57 degrees Fahrenheit, and her vital signs were so low that she was clinically dead. But emergency doctors managed to revive her by pumping her blood through a special machine that warmed it. After a long rehabilitation, she's mostly back to normal, except for a persistent tingling sensation in her hands. Number 6. Aron Ralston. In April of 2003, 27-year-old Aron Ralston was climbing in Utah's Blue John Canyon when an 800-pound boulder fell on him, crushing his right hand and trapping him. After failing to chip away some of the boulder with his multi-tool knife, Ralston tried to rig a pulley with his climbing rope to tug the rock away from him, again to no avail. For 6 days, Ralston was pinned by the boulder. at which time Ralston slowly realized that the only way out was to amputate his crushed arm. Even though the pressure of the rock had cut off some of the circulation and he no longer had any sensation in his hand, cutting through the nerves and breaking the bones with his knife was, as he recalled, 100 times worse than any pain he's ever felt before. Instead of the incident putting him off climbing for good, it was quite the opposite. Amazingly, he later resumed climbing thanks to a special prosthetic hand with a built-in climbing pick. Number 5. Luis Zamperini. On May 27, 1943, a U.S. Army Air Corps B-24 on a rescue mission in the Pacific crashed into the ocean due to malfunctions. One of the crew died, but two of them, Second Lieutenant Russell Phillips and Lieutenant Louis Zamperini, managed to take refuge on a raft and survived on fish and rainwater for 47 days. They survived the plane crash and managed to stay alive for that long, but the worst was yet to come. They were picked up by the last people they wanted to rescue them, the Japanese. Zamperini endured savage torture at the hands of a sadistic camp sergeant named Mutsuhiro the Bird Watanabe. In one particularly brutal form of torture, Watanabe ordered other prisoners to line up and take turns punching Zamperini in the face for 2 hours. He also once forced him to hold a heavy beam overhead for 37 minutes before knocking him to the ground. Despite all his misfortunes, though, Zamperini managed to survive the war and was liberated in 1945. Many years later, he had a religious conversion and tried to meet with Watanabe in Japan to let him know he forgave him, but the Bird refused. He lived long enough to see his story become a best-selling book and a Hollywood movie just before his death in 2014. Number 4. Mauro Prosperi. Getting lost in the desert may seem to be an impossible situation to get out from alive. In fact, many people that have been lost in this arid wilderness have never been seen again, dead or alive. But having an unwavering will to live and the willingness to do whatever it takes, this next entry on our list proves that surviving getting lost in the desert is quite possible. Mauro Prosperi had his eye on the prize as he made the decision to take on arguably the toughest race of its kind, the Marathon des Sables, a 6-day race through the Sahara Desert. Unfortunately, a sandstorm would hit the race, causing Prosperi to become lost and disoriented in the desert. Traveling now in the wrong direction, he would eventually come across a Muslim shrine where he was able to seek shelter. He ran out of food and water after the first 24 hours as he wasn't stocked up for any form of long-term survival. He would spend a total of 10 days out in the desert, feeding off bats and reptiles and drinking his own urine before a nomadic family would find him and bring him to safety. Number 3. Vesna Volovic. Stewardess Vesna Volovic boarded a Yugoslavian Airlines flight in January of 1972, but she had no idea that her entire life was about to change. Within the cargo hold, a terrorist group known as Utashi planted a powerful explosive which would claim the lives of all passengers and crew on board, with the exception of Volovic. Miraculously, the stewardess somehow survived the 33,000-foot fall, although she was understandably in rough shape. She had 3 crushed vertebrae, both legs were broken, and a fractured skull. Miraculously, she would somehow make a complete recovery, going on to lead a happy life and earning her a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records for the highest fall survived without a parachute. Now it's time for today's best pick. Today's best pick is a photo of the aftermath of a car crash, and judging by the looks of it, it seems impossible for anyone to have survived this. Although I can't confirm whether there are any survivors of the tragedy depicted in the photo, quite a number of people have actually survived horrific car crashes in the past. Get to know one of these survivors next with number 2. Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos Rodriguez has earned the very peculiar nickname of Haffy, as he is called by his friends. Just one look at his photo shown here would definitely tell you why he's called that name. Somehow, he survived an accident leaving him with only half of his head. Rodriguez blames his unique appearance on a car accident caused by drinking and drugs, in which he hit a pole, was ejected through his windshield, and you can probably guess the rest. It's obvious that the other half of Haffy's head ended up all over the road. What's not so obvious is how the heck he's still here to tell us about it. Before we move on, do me a favor. My analytics show that only about 15% of you watching are actually subscribed. Come on guys, what's up with that? Can you guys please hit the subscribe button? You guys watch my videos every day anyway, so you might as well subscribe and keep up to date with every video we put out. Number 1. The Stella Maris Rugby Team. Technically speaking, it's definitely safer to travel via airplane rather than by driving your car. However, there are certain people that are still terrified to fly, and with good reason. Plane crashes, when it doesn't kill you outright, can put you in a situation where survival can be impossible. What should have been a routine flight to attend a rugby match turned into a harrowing event for the Stella Maris College rugby team when the plane they were on crashed into a snow-covered mountain on October 12th of 1972. A total of 17 people were killed instantly or died within minutes, but the worst wasn't over for the survivors. Stranded on the mountainside, they were forced to survive in freezing conditions with no shelter and very little food. Using what they could of the mangled fuselage, they huddled together while waiting to be rescued. Unfortunately, the harsh conditions, as well as an avalanche, would claim the life of another 10, and the survivors were forced to eat the flesh of their deceased teammates to survive. After a total of 60 days on the mountain, the 2 fittest survivors braved a 12-day trek to seek help, saving those who remained. A total of 16 of the 45 people on the flight survived. Do you know of other impossible survival stories? Let us know down below in the comments. Also, feel free to check out the channel's other amazing videos. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Later, everybody!